All right, welcome to this explainer. Today we're basically putting on our detective hats and taking on the role of the investigator. When you're trying to test a hypothesis or solve a messy, real-world problem, relying on existing data rarely cuts it. You actually need the raw, first-hand facts. You need primary data. But the big question is, how do you actually go out and get it? Let's find out.
We're going to be grounding our chat today in C.R. Kothari's absolute classic, Research Methodology, Methods and Techniques. This book is practically a staple for researchers across every discipline, mostly because it just does such a great job of balancing that high-level conceptual theory with the gritty, boots-on-the-ground realities of fieldwork.
So, here's our game plan for today. We'll quickly touch on the quest for primary data, weigh experiments against surveys, and then really dig into observation, interviews, questionnaires, and schedules. Finally, we'll talk about how to actually choose the right tool for your specific project.
First up, the quest for primary data, or uncovering those raw facts.
Moving right along to our first major crossroads, experiments versus surveys. I like to call this the great methodological divide. Okay, so when you're out there gathering primary data, you basically face a fundamental choice right out of the gate. Are you going to manipulate things, or are you just going to observe them? Experiments require deliberate control, right? You're intentionally isolating variables in a very structured, often laboratory setting to answer the question, what will happen if I do exactly this? Surveys, on the other hand, require you to take a step back. You're observing conditions, opinions, or relationships exactly as they naturally exist out in the wild, usually across a much larger population, to simply answer, what is happening right now? Which brings us nicely to the art of observation. Literally, watching without asking. Think about it. Observation relies purely on your own direct sight. It totally strips away the respondent's subjective bias. It's like if you want to know what brand of watch someone is wearing, you don't ask them, you just look at their wrist. Now, to do this scientifically, we rely on structured observation. Before you even step foot into the field, you meticulously define your observation units and set up standardized conditions. It's an incredibly rigorous method, which makes it the absolute perfect tool for descriptive studies where you know exactly what you're looking for. But then, on the flip side, we have unstructured observation. And this takes the exact opposite approach. Instead of walking around with rigid checklists, you enter the field and just allow the situation to unfold naturally. By not restricting yourself, you capture a much more spontaneous, authentic picture of real life. This extreme flexibility makes it the ultimate starting point for exploratory research, especially when you're so early in the process that you aren't even sure what variables actually matter yet. But what if you do need to ask? That's where conducting effective interviews comes in, tapping into the sheer power of conversation. When pure observation just isn't cutting it, you need an arsenal of conversational tactics to draw out that really complex information. Need intensive, deep dive data? You're going to want to use face-to-face, personal, direct investigation. But what if your scope is massive? Or maybe the primary subject just isn't available? Well, then you pivot to an indirect oral examination, basically cross-examining knowledgeable third parties. Oh, and here's a pro tip. For ongoing data from really distant areas, you can even appoint local correspondents who regularly report the ground truth back to you. Need speed? Telephone surveys are your best friend. Want to see how people interact? Get them in a focus group. Or if you need to bypass conscious resistance to uncover hidden motives, you dive into depth interviews using projective techniques. It's all about having the right tool for the conversation.
All right, shifting gears to questionnaires and schedules. This is all about scaling up your reach.
Say you need to hit thousands of people simultaneously across a massive geographic area. Doing personal interviews for that? Yeah, that simply will not scale. This is where you have to choose between questionnaires and schedules. Questionnaires are usually mailed out directly to respondents for them to fill out completely independently. They are incredibly cheap and they cast a massive net. And it's a big gut, they suffer from notorious non-response rates and absolutely require a literate audience. Schedules, on the other hand, might look identical on paper, but they're administered completely differently. They are brought directly to the respondents by trained field workers, we call them enumerators. Now, this is way more expensive, but your response rates absolutely skyrocket, and suddenly literacy is no longer a barrier.
Now, going the schedule route is, well, it's a huge operational lift. It's labor-intensive. First off, you must hire and rigorously train patient, highly intelligent enumerators. These folks actually travel to the subjects, sit down, explain the aims of the investigation, untangle any tricky concepts, and skillfully cross-examine to ensure the answers they're getting are complete and truthful. You can really see why the capability of your enumerator is the absolute linchpin of this entire method. I mean, if your enumerators are poorly trained, your entire dataset is going to be fundamentally flawed.
So how do we make sense of all this? Let's talk about choosing your research tool by navigating the matrix of constraints.
Katari actually hits the nail on the head here. He says each method of data collection has its uses and none is superior in all situations. There is literally no magic bullet in research methodology. You can't just boldly declare that face-to-face interviews are always the best. The perfect choice is dictated entirely by your project's unique practical constraints. Think of this as your ultimate cheat sheet for fieldwork. Because, let's be real, you're always balancing something. Strapped for cash and short on time, pick up the phone for a telephone interview. Got plenty of time but a tiny budget? Mail out a questionnaire. Now, if you have the luxury of high funding and demand absolute, ultimate precision, that's when you deploy personal interviews or hire enumerators for schedules. And what if you need to map a massive area efficiently? You go hybrid, distribute mail questionnaires broadly to get the volume, but back them up with targeted personal interviews to verify your data. It's all about playing to your constraints.
Collecting primary data is definitely an art, just as much as it is a science. It demands an incredibly intimate understanding of the specific problem you're trying to solve, and honestly, a brutal honesty about the limits of your own resources. You have to look hard at your budget, your timeline, and your audience. So I'll leave you with this. Which method will drive your next great discovery? Take a good look at your constraints, pick your tool wisely, and go uncover the truth. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today, and happy researching.